This church was built here at the centre of a large ecclesiastical complex at the heart of prosperous Byzantine Gadara. Its prominent position meant it would have been visible throughout much of the city to the west, highlighting its importance and status to the citizens of Gadara. It was built in the mid-5th century CE on the Roman terrace, replacing the earlier Roman building and recycling some of the Roman masonry and columns. Inside, it was highly ornate, decorated with marble-tiled walls, areas of painted wall plaster murals, and wall mosaics including glass and gold-leaf tesserae. Remains of the geometric pattern polished marble floors are still present. The main entrance to the church, the narthex, is through the large colonnade that faces west out over the city. 4 corner apses turn the square plan of the church into an octagonal internal space, divided into 2 concentric octagons. The inner octagon creates the sacred space of the chancel and altar and is formed by the 8 basalt columns supporting a high dome ceiling. Around the chancel is the outer octagon of the ambulatory. Within the chancel and the 4 corner apses were reliquaries, stone containers probably housing the remains of early Christian martyrs. From these we know that this church and the large ecclesiastical complex around it were probably built as a focus of early Christian pilgrimage to the church and the martyrs' remains it housed. The church continued to be used following the transition to Muslim rule in 636 CE. It was destroyed during the large earthquake on the 18th of January 749 CE. Archaeological excavation found the collapsed church, columns and western facade where they'd fallen in 749 CE, and they've been re-erected in their original positions. Outside the west door of the octagonal church, a narthex in the form of a large colonnaded covered portico runs the full length of the church and provides the main entrance area. The 23-metre long colonnade is made up of 8 basalt columns with Corinthian order capitals, identical to those in the central space of the church. The columns continue the north-south line of the western wall of the atrium and divide the church from the external Roman paved surface remaining on the north and west edges of the terrace. The columns themselves are Roman and much older than the church. The consistency of their size, shape and carving makes it likely they were reused from an earlier Roman market basilica building that occupied the terrace before the church. The 2 central columns are more widely spaced than the others, and their column bases have carved notches suggesting that a screen or decorative gate was placed between them. Archaeologists found 2 layers of floor paving inside the colonnaded narthex. When the church was built, the lower level of the Roman floor was raised with a layer of plain limestone slabs to provide a strong contrast to the colourful geometric patterns of the floors inside the church. As with most Christian churches, the main entrance to this church is in the west wall, ensuring that the evening sun shines in through the doors and any windows onto the altar and chancel within. The church originally had a much wider door with carved profile, basalt sides and lintel. However, at some point later the larger opening was filled in with large limestone blocks to create a smaller doorway in the centre. Carved stone door frame profiles are probably recycled Roman stonework, as they are almost identical to the doorways to the vaulted shops on the Cardo Street below. Archaeologists found the western door and surrounding wall laying collapsed in order, allowing them to reconstruct its original position. The apses in each of the 4 corners of the building create an octagonal floor around the central octagonal space. This ambulatory is paved in opus sectile marble geometric patterns. In the centre of the north side, one panel of flooring is made up of a pattern of concentric circles that is very different to the square and diamond patterns throughout the rest of the church. This would have drawn attention to a key feature of the church, either a baptismal font or more likely the area in front of a door in the north wall leading from the atrium. The floor in the ambulatory of the octagonal church is covered in opus sectile paving, laid out in panels of 4 different geometric designs. Most of the paving is coloured marble recycled from the Roman period, probably sliced into the thin paving pieces with a large water-powered saw, before being polished to give a smooth and colourful floor that showed off the high status of this building. The most complex pattern is used in the square flooring panels in front of the 2 south apses, and is designed to give the appearance of repeating 3D cubes. The square ground plan of the church was turned into an octagon by adding a semicircular apse to each of the corners of the building. All the apses appeared to serve as side chapels enclosed by chancel screens. The curved back wall of each apse would have been continued upwards and capped with painted plaster semi-dome ceilings. The eastern 2 apses are the best preserved, protected when the building collapsed during the earthquake by the angle of the slope of the hill. The central octagonal space is formed from 8 recycled Corinthian order columns, which probably carried arches supporting a short octagonal tower with a tile-pitched roof, possibly with an internal painted dome ceiling. Set into the walls of this tower were probably grilled or perhaps even glazed windows to keep the space cool. The eastern half of this central octagonal space formed the chancel of the church, and slots and square post holes cut in the columns of the grey basalt stone edging around the space show that the chancel was divided from both the ambulatory and the western half of the space by an iconostasis or chancel screen. At the back of the chancel there is a semicircular apse, and a large stone double reliquary forms the focus of worship. Reliquaries in the chancel, or forming the altar, are common features of the Byzantine churches, and are still often seen in Eastern Orthodox churches today. At the north end of the earlier Roman terrace is the atrium, a large colonnaded building around a central courtyard that provided an entrance and reception space to the Byzantine ecclesiastical complex centred on the octagonal church. It was built in the mid-5th century CE by adapting the earlier Roman market basilica building that previously stood on the terrace, and probably reused that earlier building's outer walls. The Christian church had an important role in the administration of Byzantine cities like Gadara. The atrium courtyard within this church, at the very heart of the city, may therefore also have functioned as a space for gathering and discussions amongst the city leaders. Like the other buildings on the terrace, the atrium was destroyed during the Galilee earthquake on the 18th of January 749 CE. In the Ottoman period, the area was used to build houses of the village, although these were removed in the 1980s to facilitate the site's excavation. The atrium reused the walls of the earlier Roman market basilica on the west and north, and probably on the east sides. The western wall sits above the buried retaining wall of the terrace, which also forms the back wall of the vaulted shops below. At the southern end, this wall was removed down to its lowest course, which then formed the stylobate onto which the columns of the octagonal church's colonnade sit. A piece of stone architrave from the outer walls of the Roman market basilica, inscribed with the names of those who paid for the building, dates that building's construction to 139 CE. The outer walls were therefore already over 300 years old when the market basilica was converted into the atrium in the 5th century, and over 600 years old when the earthquake destroyed the building in 749 CE. 2 door thresholds indicate the position of the doors that admitted people from the monumental stairway from the main street into the atrium building. Their size indicates the grand scale of this building. Like many of the architectural elements on the atrium and octagonal church, these are likely to be reused from the earlier Roman market basilica building. Around all 4 sides of the atrium's central courtyard is a colonnaded walkway providing shade from the sun. The colonnade is formed by 24 limestone Corinthian columns, which would have supported the inner edge of a tiled roof. The columns themselves are reused Roman columns, and from the variation in size, shape, and mixing of materials for the bases, columns, and capitals, we know these were probably sourced from multiple places throughout the city. The central courtyard of the atrium is paved in rectangular limestone blocks in 2 contrasting colours of cream and pink. Around the outside of the courtyard, between 8 and 9 rows of pink limestone form a border. Within this, the space is divided into 4 rectangular panels filled with cream limestone paving stones and bordered by a single line of pink. Paving inside the 4 panels is set at 45 degrees, creating a chevron pattern that points visitors' attention towards the octagonal church. Unfortunately, the paving at the centre of the courtyard is no longer present, making it impossible to determine if an altar, monument or fountain sat at the centre, or if the pattern of pink paving forming a cross was the visual focus of the courtyard. Along the east side of the atrium building are a range of at least 6 rooms opening out to the colonnade around the central courtyard. Their purpose is difficult to determine, but they may have functioned as offices for the ecclesiastical centre, rooms for the priest, or perhaps accommodation for those travelling on pilgrimage to the martyr's remains housed within the octagonal church. On the north and west sides of the terrace, a paved walkway bounded the atrium and the octagonal church. The walkway gave access from the top of the monumental steps from the main street to the church and the southern part of the terrace. On the western side of the terrace, the walkway is directly above the vaulted shops below, which provide the structure to support the terrace. There must have been a fence or barrier at the edge to stop anyone falling to the Cardo street below, although there is now no trace left to indicate what form it took.